Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the March meeting of the Board of Early Education and Care. Welcome to everybody. I want to start the meeting off with some congratulations to the now official Commissioner Kershaw. As many of you know, at the last meeting, the board made a recommendation to the secretary to appoint the commissioner permanent. We were able to do the due diligence and work that is needed between those meetings, and I can say on behalf of everybody, just a more formal congratulations to the commissioner now that all of that work is done, and we look forward to the work ahead and just happy that we were able to move that process along. So congratulations. So I just end with really good news, hand it over to the secretary, who I'm sure has more good news, but I did want to make sure that we made the appropriate recognition to the commissioner and thank her for her leadership to date and to come. So thank you.
Nothing really lengthy to offer this afternoon. I'm sorry to disappoint, but I do want to quickly comment on two things. The first is that in recent weeks, we've had the opportunity to visit some providers along with Commissioner Kershaw. There's no replacement for having the opportunity to observe what's happening in this precious spaces of classrooms and talk to educators, early education leaders, and families. I've learned a lot over the past 3 months, but make no mistake, I've learned the most through those experiences. This afternoon, I just want to express my appreciation for the work that early educators do every day and my commitment to be accessible to them as I continue to learn and we continue to move forward. The second thing that I want to do is formally acknowledge Commissioner Kershaw without the acting descriptor in her title. She's already demonstrated, as we know, a deep commitment to the entire early education and care sector and has a clear passion for ensuring that children and parents access high-quality early learning experiences they deserve. Having the opportunity to visit providers and observe her interactions with staff, which are always reflective of deep respect that she has for their work and humility as a guest in their space, I can say with deep confidence that what she has and will continue to bring to the work will yield strong outcomes. I look forward to our work going forward. That is all.
Well said. Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. And before I hand it over to the Commissioner for her remarks, I do want to acknowledge 3 board members that are with us on the phone, Jamela Lee, Maria Moeller, and Cheryl Travers. And I'll hand it over to the Commissioner.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary. It has been such a pleasure to have you out at the programs, and so grateful, a lot of appreciation expressed for the time you've taken to engage with our educators and our program directors. And I just want to thank the board again for your support for me and my remarkable team. Just what an honor it is to have the opportunity to serve in this role at this time. Enormous challenges in the field, but an incredible amount of opportunity. We're going to hear about the governor's budget, which is a great budget for the agency and gives us a lot of momentum, and incredible support and alignment among our diverse early education and care workforce, advocates, providers, and partners. And so I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to do this and to do this work with all of you and with my incredible team. So. Couple updates for me. One is our next Commonwealth Cares for Children C3 survey will be available at the end of April. And just recognizing for those who may be listening that we appreciate how much work it is to fill out these surveys in addition to the challenges in the field with workforce and all the work you're doing in your programs every day. But this data has been so critical for us to get insight into sort of what's happening in the field and the impact of these grants. So we will have that out at the end of April, and we thank you in advance for the time you'll take to complete that. Also, in the beginning of April, the Early Education and Care Scholarship Program will be available again, effective April 1st. This is a collaboration between the Department of Higher Education and Department of Early Education and Care to make scholarships available for staff that are currently working in programs and are either enrolled or would like to enroll in higher ed. information about that program. So the application will go up April 1st, and information will be both on the EEC website and also on the Office of Financial Assistance website. We have had several conversations over the last month with the Department of Higher Education and with Commissioner Ortega about the opportunity to really take a look at that program and make sure that it's meeting the needs of our early education and care staff in the current moment and with the current opportunities we have. So we look forward to that work ahead with them. Relevant to today's agenda, we excited to say that we are about to post our request for proposals for child care resource and referral services across the Commonwealth. Enormous amount of work has gone in, and as we've shared with you over the months, that many of our contracts or our procurements, in addition to the regulations we're going to talk about today, are tools for us to affect the kind of transformation and reforms that we're looking for to make the system of early education and care more accessible, affordable, and family-centered. So we expect that this, as a tool, will also be able to do that. It'll be posted this week, maybe as soon as tomorrow. We'll see. Hope so. I also just wanted to mention, because I think, given the fact that we're taking action, well, not today, but hopefully next month on our child care financial assistance regulations, I also wanted to mention that the agency is governed by a number of set of regulations that are child care licensing regulations, our residential and placement regulations, and those also need to be looked at and modernized and updated, but I wanted to reassure you and let you know that those will be regulations that will be coming to you over the next couple of years. But we will definitely be going through a similar process as we did with the child care financial assistance regulations to make sure we're engaging those who are running our programs, who are experiencing the system. So we look forward to talking about that with you over the months to come. The last thing I just want to mention about today's agenda, we will have a chance to kind of talk about the governor's budget, which I'm really excited to share that information with you and have that discussion. We had originally intended to have a vote today on the child care regulations, but they are still going through a formal review process, so we are hoping to be able to bump that vote until April. But we will have a chance to share with you all the public comment that we received on the child care regulations, which, as we anticipated, are making them better and stronger, and we'll be able to share with you the changes that we made as a result of that public comment. So I want to thank those who took the time to do that as well. Okay, I think that is it for me.
Excellent. Thank you, Commissioner. I don't believe there's anyone here in the room for public comment, but I do want to acknowledge that the board has received public testimony in advance of today's meeting, and it has been forwarded along to the entire board. We have two sets of minutes to approve, just routine business. I'll take each one of those separately. I'll begin with the minutes of the February 14th, 2023 meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, or edits? Hearing none, I'll make the motion to approve the minutes of the February 14th board meeting. Can I have a second?
Second.
George, thank you. Thank you. And I'll call the roll of the members in attendance at the February 14th meeting. Secretary Tutwiler.
Yes.
Jamela Lee.
Yes.
Maria Moeller.
Yes.
Georgia Tanasoff.
Yes.
Carolyn Kane.
Yes.
Cheryl Travers.
Yes.
The minutes of the February 14th board meeting are approved. Next, we have the minutes of the February 21st, 2023 board meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, or edits to those minutes? Hearing none, I'll make the motion to approve the minutes of the February 21st board meeting. Can I have a second?
Second.
Carolyn, thank you. I'll call the roll of the members in attendance at the February 21st meeting. Secretary Tutwiler.
Yes.
Jamela Lee.
Yes.
Maria Moeller.
Yes.
Georgia Tanasoff.
Yes.
Carolyn Kane.
Yes.
And Cheryl Travers.
Yes.
The minutes of the February 21st board meeting are approved. Thank you. And now I will hand it back over to the commissioner.
Terrific. Thank you. I want to invite Amanda Sakaguchi, who's our Chief Financial Officer, to come up, who will do a little bit of a presentation and invite all of you to ask questions or offer other remarks around the proposed FY24 budget from Healy Driscoll administration. And as I mentioned, it is a very strong budget for the department. We had the opportunity to offer testimony along with Secretary Tutwiler and Commissioners Riley and Ortega to the Joint Ways and Means Committee in support of the governor's budget, and it was an opportunity for us to highlight some of the ways that this budget is going to make sure we're able to move forward with some of our key priorities and continue to strengthen the work of our early education and care field. So Amanda, I asked Amanda to come up and kind of walk you through some of the key highlights of it, and then we'll have an opportunity for any discussion.
Sure. So House 1 proposes about $1.5 billion for EEC in FY24. This is sort of the first step in the budgeting process, and it's the governor's recommendation before moving over to the legislature. So the governor's budget included $475 million fully supporting the C3 grant program in FY24. This grant allows providers to operate and provide critical education and care for our programs, despite increasing operational costs and workforce retention and recruitment issues that they're facing.
An important note about the Commonwealth Cares for Children funding in the FY24 budget is that for the first time, it is fully funded from state sources, including partially from the Fair Share Amendment. As most of you are aware, the Commonwealth Cares for Children grant program was initially funded with federal dollars, COVID-related relief funds, and so for the first year, it's being funded entirely with state, or proposed by the governor to be funded with state sources.
Yep. So coming from general fund, some from the trust, and then also some from the Fair Share trust fund that was set up. This budget also includes almost $800 million for the financial assistance program that supports about 55,000 eligible children in the Commonwealth. And this amount annualizes the rate increases that occurred in FY23, and it also provides another $20 million to increase provider rates in FY24. So it's the $20 million sort of set aside is very nice that it's flexible spending used for all providers. So that's sort of the first kind of instance that has happened in the budget.
I think it's the first time that a rate reserve has been included in a governor's budget. So again, I think part of the administration's commitment to affordability and making sure that we are able to give families access to the market in early education and care.
Yep. And then to supplement the rate increase that's also put in there, there's also a dedicated waitlist remediation sort of line item that would increase the financial assistance to hopefully get our caseload to up to about 58,000 children served by the financial assistance program. It also includes the Commonwealth Preschool Partnership Initiative by $15 million, so in total it would be $30 million next year. And these two funding elements are another step in the path towards achieving affordable and accessible early education for all families in the Commonwealth.
So the CPPI program is funding partnerships at the local level between local schools and our diverse network of early education and care programs. And it's an opportunity to expand preschool opportunities and tackle affordability at the local level, in addition to what we'll be able to do at the state level with the child care financial assistance expansion.
And then additionally, House 1 includes $5 million to work on to build on the work of the Early Education and Care Economic Review Commission and develop a coordinated strategy for supporting early education and care in the Commonwealth.
So that new line item that sets aside funds to really help us think through sort of what is the strategic financing strategy for a stable early education and care sector, recognizing some of what we learned during COVID about the instability and really the market failure in early education and care. So opportunity to deepen our understanding of strategies that might create that long-term sustainable financing structure for early education and care. So.
And this side just sort of
For your reference,
lists out
yeah.
our line items. We do have some specific to specific initiatives. We also have quality supports that's more general, flexible funding for the agency to use to help providers.
And I did want to just note that it does include or annualizes an increase in our administrative line item, recognizing the need for the agency to continue to build our capacity, particularly in the areas of family access and engagement, data analytics to drive decision-making, as well as in our fiscal team.
So the slight difference that you see is just the earmarks, the legislative earmarks that were included in the GAA last year.
So you'll recall over the course of the year that there were additional supplemental budgets that provided funding to the agency over the course. But all told, this budget is a 25% increase over the budget, the General Appropriations Act from FY23. So represents a 25% increase in what the investments in early education and care for FY24. So pretty. Yeah, I would say we're pretty excited about that and looking forward to the opportunity to make these investments in our field.
And this slide just lays out sort of the state budget timeline, where we are, where we're headed, and sort of who's on deck for who's next. So in April, House Ways and Means comes out with their budget. Typically, it's before April vacation, and then they'll come back and debate that budget after April vacation. After that, it moves on to Senate Ways and Means, and it's usually about 2 weeks before Memorial Day weekend. And then the week leading up to Memorial Day weekend, the full Senate will debate. Then a conference committee will be named, 3 members of the House, 3 members of the Senate. And then they'll iron out the differences between the 2 branches, and a conference report will be reported out. The governor has 10 days to review, veto, return with amendment, and then once she signs it, then it turns into the General Appropriations Act.
So early on in the budget process, we
Step
did,
one.
as I said, get to offer testimony to the Joint Ways and Means Committee. It was a 3-hour hearing where we had an opportunity to engage with the committee on a number of their questions, very good questions across the education continuum. So open it up for questions or comments from board members.
On the phone, any questions or comments regarding the budget?
Okay.
Can I just want to say thank you. I know the Secretariat, the Commissioner, I know a lot of work goes into advocating for priorities to start a budget process, and to hear a 25% increase just year over year, just in general, is good and positive. The C3 commitment is very positive. And embedded in all of this is still lots of really important conversation about how we continue to improve access and affordability, which maybe doesn't reflect in the numbers, but I think is reflective in that $5 million commitment to look at how we provide financing to the field. And so this is a really nice starting place. And so, Mr. Secretary, thank you for your advocacy, and your team, Commissioner, for getting us to this point, to hear the first time a rate reserve has been included in H1. Like, these are really important things that I think we should just pause and reflect on, and is a reflection to me on the commitment of the team at EEC, but also the advocacy in the field for why this is so important to just the total economy. And so I think it's important just to state the positive here, recognizing it's step one, and there is more work to do, but certainly the voice has been heard, so thank you.
I agree. I think grateful is the word I would
Yeah.
use with regard to this. So grateful to the Secretary, grateful to the administration, grateful to the Commissioner and her team. So, and I'm sure that children and families will benefit greatly from this.
It's a great starting point. I agree. All right, thank you, Amanda.
Thank you,
Thank
Amanda.
you.
So I wanted to invite Tyrese Nicholas, who's our Deputy Commissioner for Family Access and Engagement. I think you met her in February.
Yes.
Yes, and Julia Busick, who is a Senior Project Manager working with us in our child care financial assistance programs as well. So I'm going to turn it over to them we're going to start sort of in recognition of many new board members. We're going to do what we've been doing at most of the board meetings, which is just take a step back for a second. So before we ask you to take any action or understand what changes we're making to our child care financial assistance programs, and particularly around the regulations, we want to just take a step back and kind of give you an overview of like what is childcare financial assistance and how does it currently work? And it is a fairly complicated system, whether you're managing it or trying to navigate access to it. So a lot of the work we're doing is to try and simplify where we can, but wanted to make sure the board had kind of a set of information about the basics about where the rules come from and what it currently looks like now. So turn it over to you two, and here you go. I'll let you drive.
Thanks. Afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So I will start by saying 4 months in, this was a great opportunity for me to have a better understanding of the program that I manage. And I asked Julia to join me because she's been doing a lot of the work around the reforms around our waitlist, our childcare financial assistance waitlist, and in general around childcare financial assistance. So I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you, Julia, for the work that you really have been co-leading and helping me have a better understanding of what I'm tackling, right? And the work that we're going to continue to do. And so I just wanted to start by opening in that way to say that we're both learning. This is a process, and it's a very interesting process. I will say that this has been a great journey in my learning. So to start, so the background around childcare financial assistance, like what is it, right? Childcare financial assistance was the baseline for it. It's a partnership between federal and state regulation that's connected really to the Child Care Development Block Grant Act, which is the federal act. So we see it as a partnership where the federal law actually dictates the baseline eligibility, and states, we promulgate the regulations and the policies and procedures related to how we manage it. The two main goals of Child Care financial assistance is one, to provide access to subsidies, or some say subsidies, we're moving to saying Child Care financial assistance. And the other purpose is really to invest in quality initiatives, right? What are the quality initiatives? It could be consumer education to parents in the form of play groups or other educational opportunities, support in programs to, achieve higher standards within the programs, and also the other part would be qualifications for our workforce. And what are what's the top three requirements for child care financial assistance is, of course, one, you have to have a child. You must have a child. So that child has to be under the age of 13 unless there's a special need. The family's income cannot exceed 85% of the SMI. And there's this thing about countable assets. I don't have assets over $1 million, but they cannot exceed $1 million. And then the last is that the parents, you'll note that I say family a lot. And I do that intentionally because family looks different. And you'll see families and parents or guardians. We're really moving to just saying family here at EEC. And so the families, child care financial assistance, they must have a need, right, so that they can go to work or attend an educational training program. So what's the constructs, right? We talked about that child care financial assistance. It's a partnership between federal and state. And so here you'll see, I won't go through each and every one, but it shows that the Child Care Development Block Grant establishes the baseline eligibility, which were the top things I identified: have a need to go to work or school, have a child under 13, and have an income less than 85% of the SMI. And then you'll see state appropriations dictate how we can use those funds, right? In Massachusetts, that looks like 2 earmarks, right? And so those earmarks we define as income eligible, or our entitlements, which would be Department of Transitional Assistance Families or Department of Children and Families. And then what's our state statute? Our state statute articulates our responsibilities for administering, and what does that look like in the role of EEC? It's our federal funds, our subsidy wait list, and our lovely rate structures.
So part of what I think we wanted to make sure we were conveying is that the federal government sets sort of a set of standards that we have to operate within, and then we have flexibility, for example, to pick what kinds of service needs might qualify, where we might set income thresholds up to that 85%. And that means two things. One is we can only spend a federal dollar if we follow their rules. And if we want to go outside that box, then we have to use state dollars for it. And the second thing is we don't have to add additional rules if we are spending those federal dollars. So we've been spending a lot of time inside the box to figure out if there's areas where we have exceeded the federal requirements in a way that might not serve families in the best possible way. So the construct gives us this opportunity to have some level of flexibility as long as we stay within that federal box.
Yeah. And I love the outside of the box because that allows us to do some innovative things to serve families a little differently. So Child Care Financial Assistance Program. So it's interesting when I first looked at, I was like, well, what are the programs that we have? Do we have 3 programs? Do we have 5 programs? We actually just have 3 programs, right? And what do they look like? It looks like income eligible, DCF, or DTA, and families access those programs in 2 different ways, either through our centralized wait list, which is our income eligible families, or through a referral from DCF or DTA, which would be our DCF or DTA families. So forms of assistance.
So I just want to add on the DTA and DCF. So income eligible is available to any family that meets the income threshold. They get on a centralized waiting list, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. The DTA and DCF ones are what we would call a closed referral system. So they're determining the eligibility and then having them sort of touch into our system to get access to that child care financial assistance system. So as Tyrese said, in state language, our DCF and DTA accounts are entitlements, which means there's language in there that says if we ever exceed the expenditures we've been given or the appropriation, that we should go back and get additional funds to make sure that any families that are involved with either of those 2 systems that are referred for child care have access. Our income eligible does not meet that. It is not an entitlement. In other words, we don't have language that if we exceed our appropriation, we should get additional funds. So that account is really about managing to a target amount of funding that we have available to maximize the number of kids served.
Thank you. And the also thing, well, this kind of will align what this next slide is the difference between a voucher versus a contracted slot and who accesses those. For our entitlements, DCF, they have access directly to the contracted slots versus our DTA families who have access to vouchers only. So there are 2 different forms of assistance. There's our voucher, which most families access through the wait list, and then our contracted slots. Our families on the wait list can actually access a voucher or a contracted slot as well. So what's the biggest difference between the 2 is that vouchers are managed by our child care resource and referral agencies, and our contracted slots are managed by that provider, right? That's one of the biggest difference. In CCR&Rs, they determine eligibility. They handle all the enrollment, the eligibility, the resource, and the referral to other providers. And they actually have the ability to, if a family says, hey, I would like a contracted slot, they have the ability to reach out to that contracted provider and say the family would like this placement. So for contracted slots, they have the ability to serve a specific number of children. So it's not necessarily like unlimited, I would say. Contracted slots are for their entity. It's whether it's a center-based or it could be a family child care provider system, a family child care system, and they manage their contracted slots. CCR&Rs don't have the ability to manage any of their slots, and the contracted providers don't actually have access to vouchers. Now, what I would say is a fact is that they are both. Most of our contracted providers are also subsidy providers. Right?
One of the other things is that vouchers are mobile.
Yes.
So a family receives the voucher, and they can take it to the program of their choice, as long as that program takes a voucher, and we'll share that information in a minute. Contracted slots are, at Paul's program. Paul has 20 slots that we've contracted with him. And so as long as the family wants that program and has a child in the age group that we've contracted for, then the family can have access to that. So versus the mobility of a voucher that they could take with them from one program to another.
I will say with some of the reforms that we've already undergone, those families that may be in a contracted slot and they move to another area, there is ability for them to switch over to a voucher so that their child doesn't see a disruption in care. So should I pause? Are there any, I know I always seem to get questions around contracted versus voucher. Does anyone have any questions? All right.
Could I just ask strategically what the dual approach, like what's the value? Is it more efficient to have contracted slots predetermined and a hybrid mix of people being mobile, or is there another reason for it?
That is a great question, and I think one that many states have really grappled with. So some states have voucher only. Steph, you may know even more about this than we do at EEC. I invite you to comment on it too. So some states have gone to a fully voucher system, and the federal government does require that there be a parent choice built into the system. We have had contracts also as part of our system, which provide a level of stability and predictability in the financing for programs. So we will often hear, especially our programs that serve, predominantly subsidized children, that having a contract with some level of guaranteed income versus the vouchers that come and go are really important for the stability of those programs.
Okay, that helps.
And I would say also to George, is there's our contracted providers, some of them provide additional support services, and they receive an additional add-on rate for that. And so I would give, for an example, you have a family who may have come in through Head Start, right? And the Head Start program recognizes that family has a need for full-time care. Most of our Head Start programs are also contracted providers, so it allows them to provide a smooth transition for that family who may need that additional support. And what that also means is because those additional supportive services are already embedded into their program, that child will then get a full-time care of all the additional support services.
Okay.
And so that specifically works for our families that are experiencing homelessness or that are in the care of DCF.
Okay, that was helpful, thank you.
Welcome. All right, the parent journey. So I'm going to turn this over to Julia to talk about what it looks like for a family.
Okay, so right now, the journey of a parent who's looking to get financial assistance is basically they determine that they need childcare. And then they need to get on the EEC wait list. So they might do that by calling a CCR&R, calling Mass 211 or a contracted provider. Then they'll be on the wait list for
Some period of time to be determined.
Undetermined period of time.
undetermined period of time is a good way to put it. When they get up to the top of the wait list, the CCR&R in their region will send them a funding availability letter in the mail. And that letter tells them, okay, we're ready for you, we'd like to meet with you, and we have funding for you. So then the parent needs to go and find a child care placement. So they look for care, and after that, they come back to the CCR&R and start doing eligibility determination. And what that looks like is they're bringing in documentation to prove that they're eligible. They're filling out an application. And if they are deemed eligible, then they receive the voucher and they're able to start care. And then they need to reauthorize every 12 months. So sounds very straightforward. I think what we've been learning about in the past year is, while on paper it might be straightforward, the lived experience of families can be quite different. So if a family comes and already has care identified, that's the best possible situation. They can move pretty quickly through. But we often have families who are looking for care for sometimes months. We have families who might find childcare only to then go through the formal eligibility determination process and find out they're not eligible, which is very frustrating. And then we have families who, right at the offset, never received the letter in the mail because maybe they've changed addresses. And then they're removed from the wait list if they don't respond. So some of these pain points, or all of these pain points, we've tried to address in our initiatives that we've been working on over the past 6 months or so. So I'll talk about those later. But that's the summary.
Any questions?
I'm excited to get to the point where we talk about how to relieve some of the pain points in this.
Yes.
Starts with the regulations.
Yes.
Yes. I want to highlight one thing Julia said is that it's on paper, right? On paper, it's like, oh, this seems very like straightforward, and in reality, that's just not what the experience is for most families. And we're excited about what we're trying to do to really modernize modernize this system and streamline it so that the experience is better, not just for our families, but for our providers as well. We talk about Mass 211, contracted providers, and our CCRNRs. They all have some level of access to the families and ensuring that it's smooth for them, but some of these are also pain points for them. All right, so then we're going to talk about the parent journey for our entitlements, our DCF and our DTA families. And what that looks like is, here it says parent determines need for childcare. They usually do for families with working with DTA and DCF. That usually looks like they're saying, hey, you know, I'd love to be able to do this. For DCF, it's I'd love to be able to meet my my plan. And for DTA, it looks like I'd love to be able to meet a requirement for work so that they can become more economically stable. And so what will happen is the DCF worker or the DTA worker will email a referral over to the Child Care Resource and Referral Agency. And then the CCRNR would help that family find childcare. What that help could look like, they may, same as income eligible, if they already have a placement, this is pretty smooth. If it doesn't, it could take anywhere from 30 days to 45 days or longer to find a childcare provider. For DTA and DCF families, there's no, their only eligibility requirement for eligibility is really the proof their ID, right? Their proof of who they are, which is just a picture ID. So they provide that to the CCRNR, and then they sign an application and a fee agreement and an e-signature. Why do they have to do this if DTA or DCF determines eligibility? It's really to confirm that they have the provider, right? To confirm the provider, and also so that they understand they understand what they're signing up for, essentially. But there's no fee connected to them. There's no requirement of pay stubs or anything like that, even if they're working. So the parent then receives the voucher or the slot, and you'll see on the slide it says DCF only, because contracted providers have specific contracts, supported slots for DCF families, and then they can enroll the child. And then you'll see parents must reauthorize every 12 months. That still happens. So when at reauthorization, they will require another referral from the state entity. So whether that's DCF or DTA. So I want to pause and highlight what's also different in here is we our homeless families. So our homeless families and our young parents, they may also receive a referral for a voucher or for a contracted slot. Even though they're technically a part of the income eligible population, if there's a family coming in through emergency assistance for shelter, the DHCD representative will send over a referral for that family. And so and they would be considered priority. I like to say, like, our priority we have income eligible, and then we have our priority populations. Our priority populations are those families that are experiencing homelessness, or they have children with special needs, or they're a young parent, or they're DTA and DCF. And so there should be some level of priority for them, and it should feel different. And so what you see, the difference in the journey is that there's more of a priority when they receive the referral directly, right? And remember, DCF and DTA families aren't on the wait list, right? And so it's an immediate, or it should feel like it's immediate, but it's, the commissioner's laughing. We want them to be immediate, right? We want them to be immediate. We don't want them to have to wait until they come up in this line on the wait list or on a wait list within our CCRNRs.
Is there capacity in the system?
That's a very good question.
Yeah, my other question would be, thank you, that it says parent receives voucher or slot at contracted provider. is that true for children in the care and custody of DCF?
Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
both for, a
both.
foster parent can qualify if they have a foster child,
Yeah.
or the family is, if the children are still at home with the family.
Oftentimes for DCF families, it can help with stabilization or as the family is as the child is transitioning from being in foster care, going back into the care of the parent.
Yeah, I was thinking more of sort of where we have emergency removals and then the child's placed and there's a definite need for childcare, and how difficult is that to access?
So DCF has a temporary childcare program for those children that are, where there is an emergency removal. And so they have providers who have said, like, we will not fill, these are specifically for those emergency situations. And so there provides a level of immediate access for those families as they transition to a more permanent childcare placement.
And in many cases, a removal may well happen after DCF has already been
Correct.
working with the family for some period of time. So they may have childcare in place, and then we would be working with them to try and make sure that that childcare stays stable, even if that child is ending up in foster care for some period of time.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
think of the child already being in crisis and
Yeah.
sort of needing that stability of, programming.
Right,
Yeah.
sometimes
yeah.
the childcare provider can be really essential in terms of the stability
Right.
and continuity of relationships in those situations, yeah.
Yeah.
Please.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? You had mentioned on the parent journey with income eligible, you said they're on a wait list for an can you give me a range? I
Yeah.
know I would like a range.
So they may be on, we don't have terrific data on this, and it's managed sort of regionally right now. And so they may be on for 6 months, or they may be on for over a year. You'll hear about it in a minute, we're doing a waitlist cleanup project, because obviously if you're getting to waitlist records that are a year and a half old, we have much less take-up than we do if we're getting to fresher waitlist records. So we're about to do a big cleanup project that we're excited about to try and get that data sort of more up to date. The waitlist system itself is quite outdated, and part of what we're doing through reprocuring our childcare resource and referral services is also hoping to modernize and update sort of how we keep that information, how we track that information, and how we understand the experience of parents. So.
So we hope in a year or two, we should be able to
Year or
answer that
two.
question. I know, I'm being hopeful.
No.
Sooner. You think sooner? Too slow? All right, so what's the landscape of childcare financial assistance in Massachusetts? So I would say, you can see here, over 61% of our providers statewide accept a subsidy. The pie graph shows that 39% are center-based and 61% are family childcare homes, which is, what we know is that most of our family childcare homes are the ones that accept the subsidies. We would love to see more of our center-based accept subsidies as well. There are more than 52,000 children receiving subsidies across Massachusetts. And then on my right, maybe your left, it shows what our budget implications are. So 53% are income eligible, and 47% would be our DTA and our DCF related. So EEC spends $13,625 annually per child.
Which is an average, we should
Yeah.
say, because infants are much more expensive, and you might have a part-day school-age program that's less expensive. So that 13,000 is definitely an average across.
I have a question, sorry. So it says 52,000 children receive financial assistance, and 57% of all providers accept subsidies. So I'm taking from that there's more FCC, home-based providers than there are center-based?
Yes.
Right, we would expect it to be a little bit like this because of the number of family child care providers, right? There's something like 2,500 center-based programs, and we have 8,000 total programs in the Commonwealth.
And
so.
is it not financially desirable for center-based to participate, to accept subsidies?
We'd
Yeah,
love
I
to
mean,
know, yeah.
you know, one of the big challenges we hear for programs wanting to
rate.
participate or accept children who have child care assistance from us is the rate we pay. So, and thank you for the good prompt, because next month we'll be talking a lot, coming back to all of you about the work we've been doing on the cost of care study and updating on sort of where we are on the rate structure. So you'll remember we processed a rate increase in the past year, 80 million, actually historic rate increase, but a lot of conversation with the members of the field and the members of the board about the adequacy of the rates in terms of meeting the cost of care, and also for family access. So we hear a lot, I mean, we hear often that, you know, the complication of doing business with the agency is one of the barriers, but also definitely the rate we pay is a barrier for many. Or do many take, you know, you may have some providers in here who take 2 kids, and you may have some who are almost exclusively subsidized.
Any other questions? All right, the fun part.
Can I just make a comment? Sorry, I just want
Sure.
to, like, just to ground myself anyways. This is still not meeting the need of every child in the Commonwealth who is able to qualify for a subsidy. I just want, like,
Correct.
there's a lot of work to do.
No,
Yeah.
there's a
Okay.
lot of work to
I
do.
mean, both on, you know, you'll see in the next slide, I mean, we have work to do in sort of every area. Like, we know we have about 20,000 families on the wait list, but the wait list data is not great right now. So really understanding what the need is at the current level, which is, the entrance is 50% of state median income right now. So you would qualify initially at 50% of state median income, and then you continue to have access to that until you reach 85% of state median income. So we know we're not reaching all the families at 50%, let alone, you know, given the inflation and the cost of care in Massachusetts, obviously there's a need beyond that as well.
It makes me just reflect on all the work that's being done right now, which lots of things like are trying to create this improved affordability and access, whether it's C3 funding, the cost reimbursement, like all of the efforts that are underway. Just happy to see, like, I think we're moving in that right direction of modernizing and updating and making that journey for families a little bit better. And so
Thank you, and I think a lot of the work that you're about to hear about in terms of the different initiatives that we're doing, and certainly the regulations which form the foundation on which the rest of our reforms will sit, are really about making the existing system function better.
Yeah.
And we can have a conversation about who gets served and those things, but right now, I think our idea is that, you know, for families coming into the system right now, for providers who are interested or already participating in the system, we should make it easy and flexible and modern to do business with the agency.
While also recognizing that we lost a number of providers during COVID.
Right.
Right, so that's,
Overall providers, as well as those who
Right.
may have been taking subsidies. Although we did see in some of the data around sort of programs who received subsidies, because, you know, we were able to continue funding those programs during COVID. Some of those came back at a faster rate than programs that might not have taken subsidies before.
right, but it just goes to show that the access decreased, right? So the demand and then all of that plays into it, right? If some, especially wanting more programs to take subsidies.
Yeah, I mean, one
If
of-
they don't need to, then what's the incentive for them to do so?
One of the urgent needs of having the waiting list data be more up to date is for us to really understand what the capacity challenges are. Like, are they on the waiting list because there's no infant care, you know, in Roxbury?
Right.
Or are they on the waiting list because there's no school-age care in Methuen, right? So I think part of what we need to know more from the data as we clean it up.
Yeah, I think geographically there'll be differences for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we hear that, you know, and also we want to make sure that things are equitable, right? It shouldn't matter who you are, shouldn't matter where you live, it shouldn't matter what kind of resources you have, but if you have a need, right, and we're able to meet that need and you're eligible, that we're doing it, and we're doing it in a way that recognizes who you are as a family and what that looks like,
Can I just
which
ask-
is different.
Please.
Sorry, just to
Sure.
follow up to Paul's point, can you put the 57% in some kind of context, like either historically in Massachusetts or, you know, head-to-head against a comparable state? Like, how are we doing?
Oh, that's a great question. So we can go back and look at that. So over time, how many of our providers, what percentage of our providers are participating in the subsidy system? And what does that look like from other states?
Yeah, I'm trying to
And
identify.
and it would be good to try and correlate it with the rates that, or some other thing associated with the
Just
state.
to understand
So-
what problem we're trying to solve for.
Right.
like, what does great look like? Is it 65%? Is it 80%? Is it 100? I mean,
Right.
I think
like
with the
that.
last
That's
rate
great.
increase, we saw that we were behind, right? And so what we did was positive, but not nearly what we needed to occur in order to make things better in that regard. So it's more about, it's almost like a catching up that I see that we're behind on, right? In terms of making the rates more competitive and desirable for all providers to accept subsidies.
Right, and we'll review some of that data in April too, about sort of where we are in terms of the rates that we pay relative to the market, and relative to what costs are, which will help us understand why a program might choose not to participate because it doesn't work for them financially, even though many programs are making it work. So that's a great question, and we'll take a look at that data. And when Tyrese comes back up in a few minutes, you're going to get an update on our early educator pilot. Tyrese was talking about the priorities that we're serving families from the waiting list. That's how that pilot is working. It's a new priority for early education and care staff, and that has resulted in an increase in the number of providers that are willing to take vouchers. So we'll see that too. That that 57% is higher than it was, I think, last year. So.
Yeah, and it's actually a place that I'm really curious about. Like, is that what has been our average? Like, annually, what's our average number of providers that decide they will now accept a subsidy? And, how are we tracking that over time? And did the pilot really influence their decision? And so we're going to be doing some surveys, and I won't talk a lot about it here because I'm going to talk about it later. But, one of the biggest ways we're hoping to collect some of that qualitative information is through some surveys directly with the providers, as well as our families who are involved in the pilot.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges always with surveys is when you want people to share information that are not participating, they're not as likely to participate in the survey. So that's a lot of communications,
Well,
right?
that's one of the beauties of the C3 program.
Yes.
And never miss an opportunity. And the C3 survey, because, something like 88% or 92% of all the providers are participating in our Commonwealth Cares for Children program. So we have 57% here. So, in the past, this was the group we would survey, and that was the information we would have. Now we're able to get kind of an insight into the much broader field, and I do believe the survey this time is going to be asking about participation in the subsidy system and what gets in the way for programs that may not be in that C3 survey. So
I have to wonder if licensing could be connected to subsidy acceptance
Good question.
legally. That's just the attorney and me saying, how can we help you get to where we need you to be?
So someone said that last week to me. Asked me that question, like, is there something in our licenses currently that says, as a part of being licensed, do you require, is there a requirement for taking like X number of subsidies? Very similar to the way that they handle affordable housing in Massachusetts, where, there's tax credits, and if you do this, or if you're in certain areas, it becomes a you must. So that's a very interesting question. I wonder if other states do it, not sure. Something for us to think about.
Parity, right? Equal
Definitely.
access.
Yeah.
I think, I think
It really is.
what's interesting is even in, I don't know, my 18 months on the board, like, we just have, sounds like a whole new level of data and intelligence to help form some of this stuff, which
That
is.
didn't exist before.
Yeah,
Yes.
that is,
getting
how
better.
do you incentivize? How do you look at the reimbursement? How do you, we just.
Well,
it's-
how do we
it's exciting to
understand
see.
the impact
Yeah.
of different things
Yeah.
on both maybe parents'
Yeah.
engagement in the system as well as
Yeah.
providers.
Yeah.
All right, let's do a quick review of you'll be hearing about these over time, so let's touch on them briefly so we can get to the regulation changes.
All right.
So we've been working on a number of initiatives because the system is so complex, as we've been talking about. There's no one magic bullet project, so you'll see there's a number of different tactics and strategies. So we're reprocuring a relationship with CCR&Rs and contracted providers. There's regulatory changes and policy changes, which my colleague Rob will talk about. We have the ECE pilot, which Tyrese will talk about later, and then the waitlist cleanup project and the digital application and case tracking project. So I thought I'd focus a little bit on those because they are about being able to get more data from the system and learning how it works so that we can improve it. So the waitlist cleanup project is just a way to look at the waitlist, update the data, and figure out what's the real number of people who are on it. So we're sending out surveys to everyone who's on the wait list via text message and email, and then we're calling people if they don't respond, and eventually we're going to get a much more updated list and also be able to kind of streamline it down, because there's a number of people who have been on it for a while. They might not even live in the state anymore. They might not want care. So we'll be able to get to a more realistic number, which will be helpful.
And that, like I was saying before, gums up the whole system.
Yeah,
Because because you have somebody who just got on the waiting list because they have a job offer, or they're ready to enroll in an education or training program, or go to college, and we're working on a wait list record that's, outdated, or so having the data more up to date, I think will actually facilitate efficiencies across the system, both for the parents who are waiting, but also for those who are administering it.
Just a question though, is the wait list like one master wait list in terms of you're waiting for childcare? Because what we see, particularly in the field of autism, right, is that parents will get authorized for ABA hours, but they're on wait lists with every single provider that they could be in contact with. Is that come into play with this, where you're?
This one is just.
Hopefully not.
This one
Yeah.
is just for childcare financial assistance, but we could imagine if that some families will get stuck not being able to not be able to find a provider or the service that they want in the location, or, for the age group they need. But I think for now, we're just trying to get that data up to date as much as possible, so.
Yeah, and as close to a placement list as possible. So we want to make sure that the families that are on there are actually on there and eligible. And so
Ready to go.
as a part of, and ready to go. So as a part of that process, there's like a soft eligibility check as well, which is something a little bit different. And so the hope there is that those who are on there are actually on there and currently need care, and that the information is up to date. What's different in this waitlist cleanup project is that we're able to communicate not just through an email or through snail mail, but also through text. So if we don't have an email, we'll be able to text them from their phone and get them the information. And if they don't respond, we're gonna have a live person call them and follow up.
Right, and obviously you don't know the percentage of people that are on the wait list that are not gonna be deemed eligible, because that comes after, which is something that
That's
should
what
be
we're gonna-
revisited, yeah.
That's what we're
Exactly.
part of,
That's-
yeah.
Yep.
So that's part of what we're gonna be able to address. So when we get a hold of them, we'll be able to clean up their information and then be able to ask like just very soft baseline, so then they're not still sitting there waiting and they're not eligible.
Right, it's a waste of their time.
It's,
and-
it
yeah.
is.
Yeah.
And, and these two projects, that Julia highlighted, the digital application and the waitlist cleanup, where, you heard us say in the parent journey that we send letters, we wait for families to respond. These represent sort of two things, like we're texting families for the first time, and we're proactively calling families. So switching the burden to us
Yeah.
around the communication
Yeah.
piece of it, right?
Yeah.
So they get letters now, but then they also have someone from Mass 211 calling them, doing the soft eligibility check. Do you still live in the state? Do you still want care? And doing that wait list cleanup kind of up front. And then we also did a lot of, interviewing with CCR&Rs and just finding out more about the intake process. What does it look like? One thing we learned was there's, paper applications, for example, like 5 or 6 different ones. So now we have a new digital application where it's
One
all,
application.
yeah, streamlined, and you can fill it out over on your phone or on your computer, digital signature. We have it in 10 different languages, and that's been working really well for the families, but also for the administrators. It makes their life a lot easier. So I think, a major finding is things that benefit families also benefit,
The providers.
the providers, people in the field.
Yeah, and I would say, like, on top of that, there's this case tracker. And currently, we didn't have, prior to this pilot, we didn't have a tracker, so you couldn't tell where a family was at in their journey. Now we're able to tell where the family is in their journey, and we're able to collect data on how long does it take from the time that from the time the family is notified about funding to time that they're actually placed. And so eventually, our hope is that we'll be able to have more concrete data that tells us about what happens in that journey that's attached to some timeframes. So then we can better serve the families or figure out more what our pain points are.
Yeah.
Great.
You don't have to answer this now, I'm just curious, and we're playing off a little bit of George's comment earlier, like, what does great look like? I'm curious at some point, like, and I understand there's macro challenges to
Yeah.
this, but like, what does great look like for the journey for, the family who just got a job, needs childcare in 3 weeks, and starts this process? Like, what does that look like? What do we think we can get to, so that we're, again, assuming more of the burden on our side, but making sure that we're making it accessible to families? So you don't have to answer it now, I'm just
So I'll
curious.
tell you
like,
my
what-
start to
Yeah.
that question I said to Julia this morning is that it doesn't look different depending on which door you come in.
Perfect.
And so I think that's our baseline of what great looks like. And what great also looks like is the question we're asking is how are we looking at the impact on the family? And so every time someone comes to us and it feels uncomfortable, the first question we're asking is how will my decision impact the family, right? And I think that's where we start.
Great, thank you.
All right, well, thank you both
Thank
very
you.
much.
Can I, before we
go ahead,
move,
please.
I know we have some folks on the phone. Anyone have any questions
sorry.
or comments on this topic before we move to the next item? Great, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you, and you'll see Tyrus again in just a couple minutes. So I want to invite our Deputy General Counsel, Rob Orthman, to come up, and not here today, but usually his partner in all things regulation is Joy Cohen, who's done a tremendous amount of work, so sorry she wasn't able to be here today. But as I mentioned in the beginning, the sort of regulations that govern our child care financial assistance system are kind of the foundation for all those changes that we were just talking about. So there's policy and procedure changes, there's IT and technology changes, and we needed to create a new set of regulations that would enable all of those things. And so you all have reviewed them. You voted to send them out to public comment. We have had an extensive public comment period, and so I've asked Rob to remind you a little bit of what was in the regulations and how we approached it, talk a little bit about the process we went through, and then what changes we've made as a result of that process. And as I mentioned earlier, we were hoping to be able to have a vote today. Those revised regulations are still under review right now, so we hope to be able to bring this for a vote at the April board meeting. All right, Rob, you're
Thank-
driving. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, Ms. Secretary, members of the board. So I'll do a very brief overview for those of you that are familiar with these regulatory changes, and then for those of you that are new to it. So there are three main areas that we're seeking to update, if you will, in the regulations for childcare financial assistance. The first is to increase the overall system efficiency. As you just saw in the prior presentation, there's a lot of inefficiency built into the system and built into that experience for parents and families. Second is to prioritize the family needs and experience. We've found that many of the regulatory structures in place are not the most family-friendly, whether it's, overly burdensome documentation, duplicative efforts, things of that nature. And then the last is to modernize and update the system, and also to create the framework by which we can eventually update the system with new technology, new systems as well. And then there's some other related items there that I won't go through one by one, but you can see that those are some of the subtopics, if you will, of what we've tried to do in really, I say revise the regulations, but it's a substantial overhaul, I think is probably the best way to put it, quite honestly. So I'm here to talk a little bit about the public comments. So as the commissioner said, we had a very robust public comment period, far longer than what's required by law, about 2 months in length, which is certainly the longest public comment period I think EEC's had in some time. I don't know about ever, but in some time. And so this board voted to send the draft regulations out for the public comment period and to post them in the middle of December. We received pretty substantial written public comment throughout that period, and then we held a public forum that was widely attended with over 200 individuals logging in at various points, and most staying for the whole thing. That was in the middle of February, and that was done remotely, and we had very large participation from providers and advocates and families and kind of a broad spectrum of the whole population that we're seeking to solicit comment from. Received 40 total comments. We received 24 in the forum, received 16 written, and then there were actually an additional 23 written in the forum that were sometimes in the chat or otherwise, but we took them all in as we've adapted to remote meetings. And we are very proud to offer it in Spanish as well as with in ASL and with subtitles. So we were as broadly accessible as we possibly could, and we had good participation in that realm. These are the main items that we received. I will say that, and I'll go through each one briefly, but there were a lot of similarities and commonalities in the public comment we received, which I think is a good sign and says that it's not necessarily on here, but there was a lot of really positive feedback, a lot of real happiness with a lot of the things I mentioned about reducing documentation burdens and removing duplicative elements of the system. But I want to talk a little bit now, just briefly, about some of the items that we received feedback on to go further with, if you will. So in terms of further reducing reporting requirements for families, we have really gone as far as we can within the structure of the federal regulations as the minimum to reduce reporting. Reduce reporting requirements during the authorization period. So for the most part, unless there's a substantial change in a family situation where they may go above the income eligibility level, or if they were to move out of Massachusetts, for example, or something along those lines, they would have to report that to us because it could affect their underlying eligibility. But other than that, they would essentially continue forward through that entire 12-month authorization period, not have to be constantly updating us on relatively, minor changes and breaks in job status or a semester break if you're in school or something. That's a substantial change for families, and we heard a lot of feedback that that's something that families, providers, advocates were really seeking, so we're proud of that. Similarly, we're broadening the scope of the acceptable documentation. So basically, there are 3 things that a family has to certify when they apply for income eligible care. They have to meet income eligibility. Their child has to be 13 or younger, as was mentioned before, unless there's a special needs situation. And the family, the parent or parents in the household, depending on who lives in the household or caregivers, have to have some type of service need, employment, education, or something, disability or something along those lines. And so we basically have broadened the scope of the documentation that families can provide us to certify each of those to basically as reasonable a standard as we possibly can, understanding that a lot of families don't always have the exact documentation or the exact, forms that we need. So we are taking a very broad look at that to ensure that we're allowing families and meeting them where they are to hopefully be eligible. A big thing we're proud of is enabling payment by enrollment. So right now, providers are paid by attendance, essentially. So if a child is there, they get paid. If a child's absent, they don't get paid. It's not quite that simple, but for these purposes, I'll just say that it is. We're changing that system, which is something that has been recommended by the federal oversight regulatory partners, and we're doing, so that if a child is enrolled in the program, the provider's paid. Pretty much that's it. If a child is absent, the provider is still paid. If there are certain, if a child is absent for an extended period of time and goes, AWOL or the family, moves and doesn't tell us or something like that, there are ways to then, deal with that. But outside of situations like that, the provider will be paid, and we're happy because that was something we heard loud and clear from a lot of providers that they wanted to make sure we were enabling that through these regulations to provide a lot more certainty and financial stability.
It also is how private pay families experience the system, and that is something we want for our families too, right? Just as Tyrese was saying, it doesn't matter if you're private pay or we're paying that experience, both for the provider and for the family, should be the same. And this was actually a change the agency made during COVID, was encouraged by the federal government, and so.
So it was encouraged by the feds.
To pay by enrollment instead of by attendance.
That's interesting, because I think they should do the similar thing for like day hub programs for adults, right? Pay by enrollment, because what we see is a lot of programs suffering because particularly adults with special needs can have complex medical issues, and their attendance may be, on for a period of time and then something happens. So it's interesting that the federal government supported that. That's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, and so this is codifying it in regulation, which is great.
So just to clarify, so I have 8 slots, I have 6 kids enrolled, I'm getting funding for the 6, not the 8. It's not capacity.
No,
it's
you're
actual
getting
enrollment.
funding for the 6, even if the kid's out 3 days sick,
Got it.
right?
Okay.
So it used
Yes.
to be, we would pay on
Yep.
a daily rate
Yep.
based on attendance instead of enrollment. And so this is codifying that in regulation, which I think is just an important part of making the system kind of operate the same for
Yeah.
everybody.
Well, it's not fair to providers, right? If a child's absent, that means you don't
Well, you
get
can't
paid for the day.
fill that
Yeah.
slot for
I
the
mean,
day.
you're still paying
Right.
your staff, right? So.
Right. Exactly, yeah.
Great. And so another thing we're doing, and this is on the legal side of things, but it's important, is to really expand the review and appeal rights that parents have if they are denied a subsidy for they're not eligible, or they're determined to not be eligible for X, Y, and Z reason by EEC or by CCR, or if they're terminated from financial assistance due to some type of program violation. We've expanded the review and appeal processes more wide, and so that families can seek a review. Hopefully, we'll get them a swift review. They get an answer, and if a decision was made incorrectly, then it would be fixed. If it was not, then they would have the chance to appeal to a formal hearing that, as they're allowed under law. That was something that was brought up a lot by advocates in particular, particularly legal advocates, looking at this, and we heard that, and we've made substantial changes to the review and appeal regulations because of that. One other thing we're codifying in that we have done in practice is we've included eligibility for certain SNAP recipients, SNAP Pathway to Work recipients in particular. And so that has been something that's been a practice, but we're now codifying that into the regulation, so that's actually expanding the scope of the referrals for folks that are receiving SNAP to Pathway to Work, excuse me. The educational service need is something that initially we were actually looking to create more flexibility in. So one thing we've done is we've added graduate school. If you're a parent that is in school, you complete college, then you enroll directly in graduate school, you now would still be able to receive assistance. That was not the case before, so that's a significant change. Other things we tried to do with flexibility were
Sorry, Rob, let me just mention that board members who were here in September might have remembered we got a very long public comment from a parent who was talking about going on to graduate school and was losing eligibility. And it was something the board asked us to take a careful look at in the regulations and to make sure that if we're really supporting people on their economic mobility path, that if that's their chosen path, then we should continue to support them on that. So, yeah.
Thank you. So we're happy about that. And then in terms of the public comment we received outside of that, just a lot of public comments saying to be as flexible as possible with parents that are, whether they're in that kind of graduate school or they're doing college courses or they're doing training courses or things that we've expanded the part-time and full-time service care that they will receive if they're in those programs, and we're excited about that. And that's something we heard loud and clear on a lot of the public comment. So we've expanded that substantially. And the last thing I'll say is you may remember in December, we are adding domestic violence as a standalone service need. So for a parent experiencing domestic violence, they would qualify for child care and for priority status. We've gone actually further based on some feedback from advocates in that field to define domestic violence itself, and we've adopted the definition from the Department of Justice, which is a very broad definition, so that for individuals that are experiencing it or have experienced it or experiencing trauma, it would enable them to receive priority child care as quickly as possible. And that's another thing that advocates were strongly pushing us on, and we've put that into the new regulations. So those are the major pieces from public comment. I talked about each one because that's what you heard. We have adopted all of these into the regulation. I'll say we've adopted the vast majority of the public comment that we received, which we're very happy about. And then, as was mentioned, in April, it is expected that they will finally be before the board for final promulgation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So our intention is for a July 1 effective date. So I think important to note that even though we had hoped to be able to take the vote today, we'll hopefully take it in April, but none of it stops the work that's underway. So, sitting on top of these regulations is a bunch of policies and procedures that need to get reviewed and revised and updated. We need a training plan to make sure that our subsidy administrators are following the new policies, and all of that work is ongoing. So not taking the vote today won't delay the work underway as it is now. So any questions for Rob? I just want to acknowledge again that the public comment period did exactly what we hoped it would be, which is identify the areas that we might have missed or could have gone further, or maybe we pulled out of the regulations because we thought to put it in policy, and folks felt like it was important for us to put it back in for, to be clear and make that commitment in the regulatory framework.
My only comment would be, this is big, right?
Yeah.
And so I know we just spent a few minutes here, but, and I know we'll have more time with this to make the final vote, but just want to thank the leadership for this, and most importantly, all of the people that participated in the public comment period. This stuff only gets better if more voices are at the table, and it's clear that as you referenced, this is better than where we started based on that public comment. And so just thanks to those who participated in the process, who took the opportunity to share their thoughts based on their experience working within the system. And hopefully we've built something, the team has built something that will be more effective, more modern, and more user-friendly for families and providers across the Commonwealth. And so looking forward to finalizing this process.
I agree, because I think that in drafting regulations, you have to have the knowledge of the people that are living in the world that you're writing regulations for. So the public comment period, obviously you have staff involved, but, getting that direct voice helps to make sure that the regulations reflect what you want and intended them to reflect versus, sort of that arbitrary position that can sometimes not have that in-depth view of what's actually going on. So I think you got great participation. That's incredible, so.
And appreciate the thoughtfulness of extending the traditional period. I mean, doing all the right things
Right.
On this. And so looking forward to getting it done.
We are too, yeah.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, and to you and to the whole team who worked on this. So we have one more item, which is an update on, at last month's meeting, we shared kind of the early days of our early education and care pilot program to provide access to childcare financial assistance for staff working in early education and care programs. And the program is growing and changing rapidly, and we've had a chance to kind of talk to our advisory committee about this and to a number of providers. So I thought we would bring you an update on this program, which is a runaway success, I would say, in some ways. But we've also had a lot of feedback about sort of how it could have an even bigger and deeper impact. So we thought we would update you and share a little bit about the feedback we've heard, and that'll be it for today. Welcome back, Tyrese.
Thank you. So the early childhood educator pilot, or like we like to call it, the ECE pilot, we launched it in January, and it provides priority access for anyone working in a funded EEC program. What we have learned so far is that we're reaching a number of families, and we're also not reaching families, right? We're also not reaching families. Our main goals really were to support the workforce and see if we could help our workforce in retaining and recruiting new staff, and also support the staff that are already in the programs, right? By providing affordable access and also reducing the cost. The basic eligibility, and I'm going to highlight that today because some of the feedback we received was around the eligibility. And so it's for currently and newly employed staff that's working in a funded program. They have to be a Massachusetts resident, and then the household income has to be at or below 85% of the SMI. We've included on the slide today what the SMI is at 85% for a family of three, which is $97,058 a year. We intentionally did that because a lot of the feedback we received was like, what is the SMI?
What does that mean?
Like, what does that mean? What does it equate to? Is it even
What is
real?
it?
What is it? And so we were like, oh yeah, we probably
I was going to ask where it
should.
was on the previous slide when it was
It
used,
wasn't.
so I'm glad I'm not
We
alone.
had a link,
So-
and so we
Yeah.
have the link, and we also have it. So feedback we received, we changed it.
And just to note too, that as I mentioned, for our basic income eligible program, right now the income is at 50. So we did raise it to 85 for this, just to see if we were able to expand access, but.
Yeah, and so we were able to expand access, and also we also heard that can we do better at that as well, right? Because there may be families that are 85.5% or 86, and we never reach them. So I'll go into.
I mean, a piece of the feedback we've definitely gotten is, so if you look at that 97,000, if it's a two-parent family,
They're out.
Right.
they're
out.
They're out. So we've heard a lot from providers about two-parent families having hard time accessing.
Yeah. And so what I'm excited about, and I said this before, like last month, I was like, I'm excited because we continue to reach more and more families, and we have reached about 1,300 families. It's probably more. This data was as of last week. And what we've noticed is that each week it just increases and increases and increases. So we have enrolled 277 children, which is awesome. And 77 childcare educators, and I want to highlight educators. So parents, 77 parents, their income is between 50 and 85%.
So what that means is that these families were already on our waiting list.
Correct.
And until we turned on the priority, which kind of pulled them up to the top of the list, they were already on it at below 50% of state median income, which is not completely surprising knowing about sort of wages in the early education and care sector. But I think we thought we would be capturing more at the higher income level.
But we're not. So it says the majority of those families are already on the wait list. Now they have priority, so it pulls them up. And the process looks, you know, for some of those families, they're going through the new process of the digital application and the tracker, so they're moving faster. What we have heard from our child care resource and referral agencies is that these families have been waiting, and so they're very responsive. Right? They weren't waiting necessarily. They knew, like, I'm eligible, now I have priority, and they're just waiting for the phone call. And so that means the process moves faster, and for some of them, they already have care, so it's just switching over into a subsidy. So you'll see the other numbers are here. About 130 children are active. What that means is they're on and they're waiting. There are about 697, I'm pretty sure this is probably over 700 now, that are in that pending status, which is pending pre-enrollment means they're going through the eligibility process Julia explained in the parent journey for income eligible. Because all of these families and the pilot, they're actually going through the regular process, the regular income eligible process. So if you look at the enrollment by age, you'll see that 39% are infant toddler, and then 31% is preschool, and then you see that small amount, that 5% is school aged. And then there's 2 breakdowns of family child care. So family child care greater than 2 would be up to preschool, and that could be inclusive of children in out-of-school age programs. And then you see family child care less than, that would be preschool through down to infant. And so for the 5th ECE staff accessing the forms of childcare, so voucher versus contracted, you'll see most are vouchers. And I don't know, you guys may say, hey, I see 279 childcare vouchers and only 277 children enrolled. That just means some children could have two different. They could be in center-based during the day, and they could be in a family childcare program for after school. So that's what that looks like. And then you'll see there's 4 in contracted slots. So what we know is most of the staff are accessing vouchers. And then the fun slide is our program data. So I know there were questions around programs now accepting subsidies. So what we're seeing is that this 119 total new voucher agreements, this is 119 programs that were not accepting a subsidy before but are now. What we're hoping is that we're hoping to learn more about these programs. And so these are some of the programs we're gonna survey to say, hey, tell us, what led your decision to now start accepting a subsidy. You'll see that 78 are FCC programs, that's Family Child Care Systems, and then there are 11 that's Family Child Care Programs, which are independent. So a family child care system may have a number of family child care providers working with them, right? And then the independent family child care programs are just I'm running my own business, I'm not receiving support from a system. And then we have 30 center-based programs that are now accepting subsidies. So we're collecting this data over time. We'll be asking those questions and a number of other questions. What we don't know is who we're missing, right? So how many of those two-parent households did we miss? Right, and how many families are at over the 85, just above the 85% that may have been eligible?
So I
If we increase the
Oh, sorry.
threshold, sorry, Commissioner.
No, no, go ahead.
Yeah, so what I would love to, like, what we would love to know is like, how many of those families are we, they're not even applying, right? And then also, who's not applying? We heard, you know, this kind of breaks my heart, but we heard that there are family childcare providers that are eligible and are just not coming to us for whatever reason, whether it's trust, or, a better understanding of what the pilot is. And so what we're actually going to do is we're going to do some info sessions where we go to them. So them not coming to us, we're gonna go to them with someone who talks like them, that looks like them, and develop where they already have a relationship, they've already built trust. What I like to say is, like, the way that we engage with families is the way that we engage with anyone. And so how you do that is you meet someone where they're at, you build trust and relationship, and you honor, right? You honor that they know what they want and need, and that's for our providers as well. And so I think that's critical in us learning more around the families that we're reaching, the providers that we're reaching, and the impact that we're having overall.
Oh, I was just going to ask you to highlight some of the key feedback that we heard. I think the predominant one was around the income level
Oh,
and
it
whether,
is, yeah.
you know, and if we're pushing to raise salaries
Yep.
in some ways in our programs, and we have this level of eligibility, are we sort of working in some ways at cross purposes, right?
creating a little cliff effect
We
there.
are of our own, and if what we're trying to do with this program in some ways is increase the compensation package for our early educators, so, and I will say that, you know, this pilot this year is funded by state dollars. So remember I was saying, like, if you're inside, as long as we stay inside the box, you can spend a federal dollar. If we go outside the box, which includes going above, you have to spend a state dollar on it. But this has been, I think there is some flexibility for us to try at somewhat of a higher income level. We don't have the system to yet manage that, so we have to figure out how to do that. But so I would say the number one feedback we heard was around that income level and it being kind of inconsistent with sort of what we're trying to do in terms of compensation package and salary, particularly for two-parent families, which is, and then worries about the cliff effect too, and whether people would start to
Yeah, we're just
cut
making
back
the runway
hours.
longer. That's what we heard. They're like,
Yeah.
you know, where it's taking a little bit longer to get to the cliff, but they're gonna get there.
Yeah. The secretary and I had the chance to meet with an early educator who is benefiting from this program, and she'd been on the waiting list, and just prior to the pilot being launched, she was contemplating, and I think had kind of decided to cut back her hours so that she would be able to qualify at the 50% of state median income. And here's an educator who's working in one of our programs, would have affected the ratios and the capacity at the program. And then we launched the pilot, and she's in between this 50 and 85% of state median income, so she was able to benefit from it. And she told us that her how much she's paying for childcare went from $600 every 2 weeks to $10 a day.
And that was part-time. We should work
And
on that.
and so now she's able to enroll her child full-time. And I think I might have mentioned, I don't know if it was at the last meeting I mentioned too, you know, we had parents who told us that they were able to send their kid to, they're gonna be able to send their kid to camp for the very first time, and then programs who've been able to kind of call back people who had turned down jobs as a result of being able to get support with their childcare. So I think as we think about compensation more broadly and the recruitment and retention, help paying for childcare is a pretty big benefit. And, you know, it seems to be working and meeting a need. So I think the question for us is, where do we go? You know, we're going to continue to learn, and we're going to continue to bring the learnings to you and engage with those who are experiencing the program.
Yeah, and how do we sustain the families that we brought in, right? So if we brought you in at 85%, how do we keep you in, right? And so that's where there's the look at like state versus the federal dollars as well. So do we use state dollars to keep them in, right? Because that means if I came in at 84.7%, I get a raise. I get a little raise. That means next year I'm out. Right, and not, because then I'm no longer eligible. So those are things that we're thinking about, because we don't want, you know, we don't want to harm families. What we do, we want to be thoughtful and intentional about supporting them and supporting them through the cliff, you know? And I would say, you know, that's important. So here, what we want to know, what we do know is that some of these families are in poverty, and the best way to be better off, I always say better off than when you came in, is to support their economic mobility by making sure we're providing the resources and giving them the information so that they can make informed decisions for their families. And I said they, not us, for them, and us to support them in that journey.
Great. Questions for Tyrese about the pilot or comments?
My only comment, I mean, I like a pilot that works, but what I like about when that happens, though, is it does give you the flexibility to take some time to look at the intended and the unintended consequences with some flexibility so that you can build something back better, right? And so, appreciate your leadership on this, because it does sound like it is having a positive effect on a lot of families across the Commonwealth, but there are some learnings here, right? And we want to promote economic mobility, but we need to have an appreciation for the decisions that families are making. Do I take the raise and forego my childcare? Like, we should be we shouldn't be putting people in those positions. So appreciate just your perspective and the way
It's
that you're
personal,
bringing it.
you know,
Yeah.
like I have family, I have a cousin who works in family engagement.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, did you know about the pilot? She did not know about the pilot. You know, she didn't know about the pilot because she works in a program that supports their staff, right? And so she didn't know. And I said, you're eligible, apply. Right? And no, you may not need like after school care for your daughter right now, but the summer is coming and you want to be able to have options. And so have the option for it. And as well, like families get to decide. You know, I have another family member who she decides every year. She lives in the South End of Boston where, you know, we grew up. We're from South End, Lower Roxbury her whole life. She chooses not to take the raises because she doesn't want to lose her housing, right? She doesn't want to break up what's sustainable for her, you know, the life that she's made for her son, for her and her son. And she gets to choose that, and I don't get to make a judgment on that. None of us do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions or thoughts around the pilot as we continue the learning?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tyrese.
So I have a general
Please.
question. So I am happy and pleased about a lot of these changes. They're very smart. I think they're very smart. I know that I wanted to ping you all because I know that some data pieces that I will consistently ask for. So I wanted to let you know. I would love for you to keep track of sort of the voucher recipients by this ECE pilot, also by the changes that you've made in eligibility related to education, SNAP, DC, of course, you always keep the DCF, the DTA, but I'm gonna ask for at some point a comparison to see how things have changed. And what I also wanna be able to see over time is sort of the voucher recipient sort of across that SMI income range, because some of the changes that we've made that are good changes are changes that are gonna affect access at that upper end of that SMI range, but we wanna make sure that it's not detrimental to those families at that lower end. So I would love to make sure we keep track of that data.
Okay, great. Helpful. We can add that to our data wish list. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions from the board? I just want to say thank you, Commissioner, to you and the team. I mean, I think when we look at last month's meeting, which was a very robust conversation about the innovation happening in the field around the workforce, and today as we look at modernizing the subsidy system and the financing system, and that will continue into to next month's meeting as well. I mean, I appreciate the concerted effort here around kind of, again, access, affordability, quality, the kind of user experience, the way that families are interacting with the agency. Like, this is building towards something, and you can see the shift happening, and we're gonna need data to kind of back that up to ensure that the decisions were well intended and resulted in the way that we wanted them to. But appreciate what's being built here. You can kind of feel it kind of happening, and I know from the team, the capacity you've built at the team, working on a number of different fronts, and
All fronts.
all fronts.
Pushing on all fronts,
And
right.
so, you know, if you can actually take all this work and put it together, you can see the picture that's being painted here. And I know you're all working fast, but yeah, it's crystallizing for me. And so grateful for the leadership. And again, as we think about the work around the regulations, you know, I think the providers in the field, I think their ability to feel comfortable adding their voice to this process makes me happy, because I do think it results in a better product and a better service that they ultimately are the ones that are going to engage and interact with. And so thankful for that voice as well.
I just want to add, as the longest-serving member of the board,
Yeah.
that, you know, COVID really did impact adversely our work in terms of strategic planning and moving forward, which it did, you know, across areas, but childcare really stepped up during that period of time and was basically the only service available to a lot of families. And so both the staff and the field need to be commended for what they did in that period of time, but also recognizing as we're now starting to make movement forward, that the ability to do so was impacted in a way that didn't exist in other fields, right, because of the demands that were put on them. But I just want to sort of just say that, like, yes, we're making great progress. You'd always like to make it faster and
Yeah.
sooner and more, but it's moving forward, and it's
Yeah.
moving forward in a positive way that's unprecedented. So, you know, congratulations to the secretary, to the commissioner, and to the entire EEC team, that you guys are doing phenomenal work, and it's going to greatly impact families. You know, you just need the opportunity to get the work done, and, you know, time hasn't allowed for that thus far. So that's all.
And to those that might be watching that think we're not, I would encourage them to add their voice so that we can understand, you know, where we may not see some things or have some blind spots. So well said. Thank you. Is that it? All right, great. Can I get a motion? I'll make a motion to adjourn. Can I get a second?
A second.
Call a roll. Call a roll.
Sure.
Carolyn?
Yes.
Secretary Tuttle?
Yes.
Georgia Tanasoff?
Yes.
Stephanie Currington? Jamela Lee?
Yes.
Maria Moeller?
Yes.
Cheryl Travers?
Yes.
And the chair says yes, and meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.